Well, we're on the subject of homeowners associations. Here's the story of how my parents' HOA tried to use a 40-year-old rule to stop them from repairing hurricane damage and got the shaft for their trouble. A few months back, as you all may remember, Florida got pretty beaten up by a couple of hurricanes. My folks lived down there, and while none of the damage that they sustained was life-altering, horrible or home-destroying, homeowners insurance kicked in, and they had some water damage through the roof. They also needed a new one because of all of the shingles that had come off debris that had punctured it. My folks looked through roofing options and determined that a metal roof would be a great option to reduce damage maintenance on their home. Plus, it would serve as a more energy-efficient option with passive solar collection and fewer thermal losses in the summer-winter. It's more expensive, but my dad was basically our personal finance incarnate while I was growing up. He's in his 60s and has finally concluded that he has FU money so long as that community is concerned, so the roof was a good investment. It looked like a win-win-win with that roof. Then they reviewed the HOA and saw that, as of 1989, metal roofs are prohibited in the neighborhood, subject to fines and mandatory removal. Reviewing the bylaw further showed that it was clearly referring to older, crappier tin roofs, not a proper metal one like today's market provides, which looks great and has all of those other benefits. My folks wanted to play by the rules, though, and called up the HOA to explain the situation. HOA was friendly and said that they would be looking into that bylaw and that my folks weren't the only ones who requested that they be allowed to have a metal roof. My parents couldn't get a roofing contractor in for a few months anyway, too much demand, since everyone else's roof got wrecked, so they waited a few weeks and got nothing new out of the HOA. Tried again a few weeks later. Nothing. After 2 months of this, they said F it and started construction on the metal roof. Popular opinion in the neighborhood was on their side, and the roof was covered with a tarp that wouldn't last forever. The new roof got installed over the course of a few days, and then we found out the HOA's crap. The neighborhood has a nice brick sign out front that says, "Welcome to neighborhood name." It's very classy, very nice, and was very damaged in a hurricane. The HOA was strapped for money due to other repairs dues, and some prick had the bright idea to impose as many fines as they could on the neighborhood to pay for these repairs, starting with my folks. They served my folks with a letter claiming that they were in violation of the HOA and demanded a $25,000 fine and that they remove it. Which is, of course, absurd. My poor mother is very much a play-by-the-rules sort, and she was worried sick. Dad's ex-Navy and a contract negotiator. He essentially checked his 60-year-old knuckles and said, "Oh, you little boys wanna play, do you?" So, they set about researching and making some calls. Poor mom kept waking up at 1 a.m. unable to sleep, and I felt terrible for her as she went through this. But then, they had a breakthrough. A few weeks after being served, I'm fuzzy on the timeline, since I don't live in Florida, it may have been less, there was essentially a burn them at the stake meeting of the HOA, where my parents could defend themselves for an absurdly short amount of time, and the HOA could rip into them for daring to defy their wrath. So, my mom, because she's more social, has a better temper than dad, comes up to speak and lets the HOA know that they can't do this. HOA smirks and says that they sure can, they have a 40-year-old statute saying that they can. Mom says, "You do. But I have state law on my side, which supersedes your statute." Turns out, there's a law in Florida stating that an HOA, or really, any regulation, cannot be used to prevent an eco-friendly improvement from taking place on anyone's private property. And wouldn't you know it, the passive solar of the metal roof counts as an eco-friendly improvement. Turns out, the roofing contractors have dealt with similar stuff before. When Dad mentioned what was going on to them, the contracting officer pulled out a few letters of accreditation and a few past cases where the court had determined that their product was eco-friendly and forced the HOA to pay all legal fees. My mom produced all of this for the HOA, who had to admit that this was in fact ironclad. Strapped for money as they were, they couldn't afford to pay a lawyer. HOA head growls, "Is that all?" Mom turns up the sweetness to 11. "No. I see in the bylaws that we can vote to impeach board members at any HOA meeting and to elect their replacements. I move to impeach all of you. I nominate my husband," and she rattles off a list of names. HOA is stunned. Well, Dad looked into the legal, Mom looked into the new neighborhood. Popular opinion was on their side, and the hearing was public for the neighborhood. Mom convinced a majority of the homeowners to attend and remove the board for their crappy policy. With that, my parents are now on the all-new board, and Dad is putting his contract negotiation skills own craftsmanship skills to work repairing the front entrance. And metal roofs are now allowed by the all-new HOA. Maintenance guy throws out 15 years of important knowledge. TLDR, a guy I worked with knew he was going to get fired, so he threw out his notebook that had 15 years of notes of how to do his job. Management really wanted that book so they could get rid of him but keep his knowledge. They tried to unfire him until he could write it down again. He said no and left. A while ago I worked at a baseball store called Balmart, or a general goods store that sounded like that, not so long after the Great Recession of 2008, and management was trying to cut costs because of falling profit. One of the first things management did was fire 2 of the 3 full-time maintenance cleaning guys. The one guy they kept, I'll call him MG for maintenance guy, was amazing at his job. Everything in the store ran well because of him and his willingness to go beyond what was required to help people. A genuinely nice guy. For 6 months management tried to make having 1/3 of a maintenance staff work, and it failed miserably. MG could not do everything, and over time management increasingly asked him to coordinate some part-timers that were supposed to do the cleaning and carts. He spent so much time coordinating that he had no time for maintenance. The night crew was also cut, so they couldn't pick up the slack. Then 2 things happened within the space of a week that told management how important he was to the store running well. First, some cleaning machines broke down. Turns out they have to be properly cleaned weekly. If left alone they gum up real bad and parts wear out quickly. A several $1,000 repair bill because he was told to prioritize coordinating part-timers over tinkering with machines. A few days later the deli lady nearly quit after the blade on the deli slicer went flying off and could have cut her face badly. Turns out that the bolt that held it in place was loose and MG had tightened it weakly for her. When he didn't have time to do that anymore he told management it had to be replaced for safety. Well, management didn't do that because it cost money, but they told people it was fixed. That could have been a lawsuit or criminal charges. They and deli lady got lucky. So, management sat down with him and asked him why things were going wrong. MG told them point blank he needed enough time for maintenance and someone else had to coordinate the part-time cleaners and check up on them. They were rather lazy. Management called BS. They said maintenance should be easy and done quickly. MG got mad because that insulted his professionalism and he pulled out his notebook from his back pocket. It turns out that over his 15 years he had filled the book with charts, schedules, and diagrams of how to do his job and keep things running. There were over 100 things he checked weekly or monthly. There were a lot of machines he kept in running order, some had certain things that were half broken and had to be wiggled in a certain way, etc. To be honest, a lot of these things were minor or major safety hazards, but over the years management was fine with not replacing multi-$1,000 machines if MG knew how to keep them working. As well, he did things that he should not have done, like calibrating machines for departments that should have done it themselves or contracted it out, etc. But he was a nice guy and he liked helping people. He told me that he spent about a half hour telling management about what he did and he suspected that until then nobody had ever known how much he did. Well, he may have said a few swear words and derogatory things while telling management why he needed time to do stuff. It was not a good moment for him and he was pissed. At the end he put his notebook back in his pocket and offered to take a week to write up everything he knew so that management would have written proof of why his job mattered in case a higher-up asked why they increased maintenance costs when corporate was demanding they cut costs. The multiple managers in the room looked at each other and asked him to leave so they could talk in private. He told me, several years later, when I ran into him somewhere and had lunch with him, that he had a premonition as he walked out of the room, so he went to the back room and tossed his notebook in the garbage compactor. For good measure he then went around the store and emptied all the garbage cans and tossed those bags in, so his notebook was properly buried. He was fine with it, all that information was in his head. After a few minutes later management called him back. They told him that they could not allow him to keep working there because of the level of insubordination he had showed. They said as soon as he surrendered his badge, box cutter, and notebook he would be escorted out of the building by security. They basically treated him like a criminal. Most fired people are not escorted out unless they were suspected of committing a crime that could not be proved. He handed over his badge and box cutter. They asked for the notebook. He said he threw it in the compactor. Their eyes went wide and they asked why he threw it out. He said he thought he was going to write everything up nicely on the computer from memory, so he thought he was done with the notebook. At this point management starts looking at each other worried because they had intended to take his book, fire him, and have a less subordinate part-timer who doesn't get expensive benefits like a full-timer do his job. Now they couldn't. One of the managers suggested that he be allowed to write up the info before being escorted out. The others agreed. He was given the chance to be unfired just long enough to give them the info. How kind. He laughed and walked out, head held high, and management followed him to his car to make sure he left. I don't have exact numbers, but I guesstimate the store had to spend at least 20 or 30,000 bucks to replace stuff that MG had kept working beyond the equipment's lifespan, and the new guy they hired had a hell of a time figuring out how things worked. To be honest, in a few cases MG had gone too far, like creating fire hazards by taping broken chargers together after rewiring them instead of tossing them, but management had never complained when he saved them money. There was also a lot of things that should have been done by the health and safety team or the departments, but they also never complained about having less work. I asked him if throwing out that notebook was illegal, but he said it was personal property to help him remember things. It was not a work-provided notebook. He was proud of what he did. His pride clearly showed in how he told the story. He said that nobody is allowed to question his professional judgment by implying he is lazy. I agree. Edit. After reading the comments, I'll say a few things to clarify some things. It might be too late for that, but I don't check Reddit while I sleep. I came in the day after the deli machine incident. I was hearing things and I asked someone what happened. I was told that the machine malfunctioned while deli lady was using it and she freaked out and refused to come in. She took a few days off to calm her nerves. Over the course of the next few days, I heard multiple versions of the story, some involving the blade coming off, some not, and one that involved the blade getting lodged in the ceiling. Did I pick an interesting version of it to retell? Yes. The problem with telling someone else's story is it keeps getting better every time it is told. So, if you see people commenting that deli machines don't work that way, they are probably right. 2. I mentioned that this happened soon after the Great Recession, which is important. According to people there, management used to readily approve replacing damaged equipment. It was after the recession they stopped doing that and relied on MG's temporary fixes. A lot of what he did was not supposed to last. He was really pissed at the end because multiple times management had refused to replace stuff that was obviously broken, and at times management had told them they would replace something and then changed their minds without telling him. That is why he really snapped at the end. 3. Some people have pointed out that replacing $20,000 of machinery is cheaper than paying a guy for 15 years. That is technically true, but stuff does not stop breaking down or stop needing to be cleaned just because someone was fired. The store had to replace him anyhow, so firing him did not save money. As well, that $20,000 or so of replacement should have happened over 4 or 5 fiscal years, not all at once. Chances are some manager kept getting good annual reviews for keeping capital spending down, not realizing that he was just postponing the inevitable. Final edit. I don't know what exactly was in the book, but I can speculate. Yes, it was probably a lot of scribbles that could not be easily deciphered. Yes, in the long run he was easily replaceable, and the incident is a blip on profit. The one major thing management probably really wanted was the list of what machines needed to be watched tinkered. The couple weeks or so after he left were a show because people were afraid to use stuff because of crazy stories circulating about deli lady, see above, but within 2 months things were humming along fine. However, this is not a subreddit about proper management or profitability, it's about revenge, and he got his revenge.